and let's get started. So I've got Packet Tracer right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just add a switch right here. Okay. Now, when we configure a switch or a router for the first time, what we need to do is we actually, let me bring, where you can kind of, hopefully you can see it. There's what's known as a console port on routers and switches and most networking devices. They call it a console port. This allows us to manage the device. We say that out of band, meaning you don't need network access. Okay, out of band just means all you have to do is be able to connect to the device. So what we do is we use a rollover cable. And in the old days, we connected to a serial port, RS-238 port, using a DB9 adapter. Oh my gosh, that was old. But laptops, for the most part, they don't have these serial ports anymore. So you can also connect to a USB port as well. Now, when you do this, you're not connecting via a network. Basically, the router or switch becomes the computer, and you become a terminal, just a dumb terminal, basically a monitor and a keyboard. So that means you have to run what's known as terminal emulation software, because you're going to be accessing the computer, and your computer is actually just the terminal. What is that terminal emulation software? It's things like PuTTY or Teraterm. And you select serial, not SSH, not Telnet, but something called serial. And then you tell it what COM port you're going to connect to. Okay. Usually it's COM1, COM2, or whatever the USB port is emulating. It has to emulate a serial port. Okay, so you connect via a physical port. Then you have what we call these parameters that have to match between your terminal emulator and the router or switch. Now, Cisco routers and switches expect this information. So you exactly like this. The baud rate, which is kind of like bandwidth, but not really, 9600 baud. 8 data bits, you don't have to worry about what this is, but 8 data bits, 1 stop bit, no parity, no flow control. That's what the switch and router is expecting. So this is what you have to set on your device. Okay. So when we are actually configuring these devices, the command line interface for the first time, really think of yourself as you have plugged in your laptop to the console port. And this is what you are doing via a terminal emulator. Okay. Any questions on that before I get started on the actual commands here? All right. So that's what we're going to pretend like we're doing right here. I'm going to go to my preferences here, make this all a little bigger. I'm going to go to font. Make that a little bigger. Let's see, CLI. I think I can probably, let's see if I can, maybe 18 will be, well, let's try 20, see how that does. Oops, can I make it 20? Yeah. All right, see if that helps a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to click on switch here, and I'm just going to click on CLI, command line interface. Yep. So I'm going to hide the switch so we can see my script over here, so you can see where I'm headed. Now, when you first connect to an actual device, many times all you'll see is a blank screen. Like, well, wait a minute, what happened? Am I not connected to the device? What you have to do is hit enter. Oh, okay, then you'll get some kind of prompt. Okay, now, let me just mention something, what has just happened when you boot up the system. When you boot up a router or switch, this is a computer. And it actually, interesting enough, follows the same process, pretty much the same process as any computer in the past, like the old mainframe computers and our laptops and cell phones today. Okay, first thing it does is the ROM chip is in charge. There's some firmware on the ROM chip. and it goes through what's called a power on self-test. Basically wants to know what is connected to me, CPU, RAM, ROM, everything okay. Then the ROM chip's going to load a bootstrap program, meaning I've got to get myself booted up here. And I'm kind of done with all this. So I need to give this over to an operating system. So we'll look for an operating system. On Cisco devices, it will look for the operating system on flash memory. Sometimes this is embedded in the device. Sometimes it's like a flash card, kind of like a SIM card, it looks like, that you just plug into the device. If it can't find it there, it will look for something called a TFTP server. It will call out, it will try and be on the network. It says, hey, who out there's a TFTP server? Can you send me an operating system? Okay. Then it will actually load the operating system into RAM memory, just like your computer. The next thing, and we'll talk more about this in a moment, it wants to see if there's a configuration file. Has this router or switch been configured before? Okay. And what we're going to see is that these are the components of the physical components within the router that we're concerned about here. So, and we'll talk more about this in a moment, but let me just point out, here we go. The operating system is in flash memory, permanent. That's permanent storage. When you boot up, it gets copied from flash into RAM memory, where that's where the operating system is run. Everything we configure on this router is done in RAM memory and update something called a running config file. Okay, I'm going to go over this here. All right. So right now I have a prompt and I'm at what's known as user exec prompt. Now this is users, meaning not like, you know, the regular users. This just means a network technician, network administrator, but at this level, I can't actually make changes. I can look at things. Okay. If I want to see the commands available, I can hit the question mark. I'm gonna make that big. There we go. And it tells me the commands available. Now, there's more commands available than this, first of all. But this is an emulator, so it doesn't emulate everything. Also, don't get intimidated by all the commands and parameters out there. Cisco gives you everything and the kitchen sink. Okay, everything that's almost possible to do on this device. Not that you're going to need all of this or need to know about everything. Okay, so don't get intimidated. All right, let me move this over a little bit here. There we go. All right, so I'll show more about these options, but if it's more than one screen, you can press the space bar to get another screen load of output, or the enter key to do one at a time, or just hit any key to stop. We'll see that in a little bit. We see here that we have a show command. If I want to see if I just type show, by the way, notice it says incomplete command. Okay, that means it's requiring some kind of parameter after it. So let me hit question mark. Oh, show something. What do I want to show? There we have that more right there. Okay, so that's where I can hit the space bar to get another screen's worth, or hit another key just to hit the enter key to get another line, or space bar, I'll get the rest on the next screen. But these are all the possible commands. Okay. If I did show, let me try show Mac. Actually, there's two commands that will do this, but let me do show Mac. And what if I hit enter again? Still telling me incomplete command. By the way, I can hit the up arrow to repeat, down arrow to go down. Okay, what else are you looking for? Oh, I can do show Mac space address table. This is the old command, so that there's two ways to show the MAC address table. So I'm going to do ADD. Now, notice there's nothing else that starts with ADD. There's no other options. So actually, I can do something called autocomplete. What I'm going to do right now is hit the tab key. Watch what happens. It auto-completed the rest of it, as long as what I gave it was unique. There's no other parameters or commands that started with that. All right, well, it's showing me the MAC address table. We'll learn about that later. I can also abbreviate commands. I can shorten them. Instead of show, I can just do SH, as long as nothing else starts with SH. So I could do show, MAC, add. Will that work? Let's see. SH for show, the MAC, and then add for address table. I can just give enough, yeah, that just uniquely identifies each command or parameter. All right, so this is user exec mode. Again, what that means is I can only look at things. I can't make changes. If I want to make a change, configure the device, I have to go into privileged exec mode. The way I do that is I type enable. Notice my prompt changed. Okay. Now I'm in a different mode. Now we're going to see in a moment that I should have a password to get from user exec to privilege mode. Now, if I type the question mark key, look, question mark, and I have more options. I have all the options of user exec and some other options, other commands, because now I can actually do some configuration. All right. Any questions so far? How are we doing? This will make more and more sense in a moment. And believe me, by the end of this course, you'll be going, oh, this is, I don't need to memorize. I've done this so many times, this is easy. All right, so what I had mentioned is in the router or switch, there's something called a running configuration file called running config. This is where all your current configurations are. Now, we haven't configured this switch before, so let's take a look at what this file looks like. I'm going to do show, run, and I'm going to hit the tab key to auto-complete it, just so we can see the entire command. Show running config. I'm going to hit enter. Now, what it's showing me is that this is kind of the template for this switch. It has a host name switch. This is why we have switch as our prompt. We're going to change that in a moment. It tells me the version of the iOS I'm running. It tells me a bunch of other things as well, including any configurations on any of the interfaces. A lot of this stuff will make more sense later. Okay, we got something called an interface VLAN, a line console. We'll see some of this in a moment. This is a template. I basically haven't configured anything on the switch yet. Now I am in privileged exec mode. If I want to go back to user exec mode, I type disable. And notice my prompt changed back. If I try to do that same show running config command, watch what happens. It tells me it's invalid. That's because this is not a command that's available at user exec mode. I have to be in privileged exec mode to run it. I have to be in privileged exec mode. Yep. All right. So privileged exec mode allows me to actually do things. Now, I'm going to show you a little command. I've got it over here on the right. If I wanted to see what the time setting was on this device, what time it thinks it is, I'm going to do show clock. Okay. Like most operating systems, especially Linux, they default to March 1st, 1993. Now, on your networking devices, it is important to have the correct date and time. Why is that? That's because if there's when there's errors or any kind of troubleshooting you have to do, and you have to look at logs called syslogs from these different devices. A lot of times you're looking at multiple devices, trying to find out where the problem lies, and you need to know the sequence of events that happen between those devices. Don't worry about what this looks like right now, but what's important is that they all have the same time. So you know what happened when, at what device. You would not set your time and date by hand on a device, on your networking devices, typically in a large network. There's something called network time protocol. We actually talk about this in CCNA 3 class, but you have a server that gives the time to all your devices, just like how your computer gets the time and date. It gets it from a time server, another clock outside. You didn't set it. It receives it from another device. Okay, but we're going to set the time just so you can kind of see how these parameters and help uses. So we're going to set the time using the clock command. So if I hit the question mark here, we see that there's a clock command, manage the system clock. Okay, let me type clock, enter, and it tells me incomplete command. Well, what does it want? Clock, question mark. What it's looking for here is a keyword or parameter called set. So it wants me to type in set. Okay, what else does it want? I'm going to hit space, question mark. Now it wants me to put in the time. So it's telling me, but it wants it in this format. Okay, so I'm going to put in the hours. It looks like it's 09:25, and we'll just put 00 for the seconds. Then I'm going to hit question mark to see if it needs anything else. And it says, yes, you have two options. I want the day of the month or the month of the year. You can put it in either order. Okay, so let's say, let's go ahead and put in the month. So what month is this? This is August. And I'm going to hit question mark, see what it wants next. Now it says, okay, you put in the month. So now give me just the day of the month. That's your only option. So what is today? The 26th? No, yeah, 26. Question mark. Now it wants the year. 2021. Let's do another question mark. What else do you want? CR. Whenever you see CR as an option, that means you're done, or you have the choice of being done. Sometimes you'll see carriage return with other options that are optional, but it says now we are just done. So let's hit enter. Now if I do show clock, there we go. Here's our date and time. Now, that's probably the only command you ever use without having to do something else. We did this. We are at privileged exec mode. Most commands, we have to be, you can see it right over here, in something called global configuration mode. Global configuration mode says, I'm in a mode where I'm kind of at the main, kind of like the device, the switch or router in general. Okay, not a specific interface, not a specific console port, anything. I'm kind of at the, at the router switch in general. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to go type configure terminal and watch the prompt change. Sometimes we call this the config prompt. By the way, can everybody see these commands okay? Can you see that? Okay. You have young eyes, hopefully. Good eyes. Better than mine, I guess. All right. So that's going from that configure terminal takes us to global configuration mode. If I want to get out of global configuration mode, I type exit. Okay. And it takes me back just to that kind of root prompt. I'm going to go back into global configuration mode, but I'm going to type conf t. So all I need is that's unique. and that's unique. Conf T, global configuration mode. First command I'm going to do is change the prompt, the name of my device, host name. And by the way, let's do a question mark here. So you'll see a different group of commands that are available, including host name to set the system's name, the name of the device. Host name, and you can't use spaces. There's some rules on what you can and can't use, but I'm going to just put, core switch. Okay, press enter. Watch what happens. My prompt changed. Okay, very cool. Hey, where did that go? Let's go back to someplace. When we did the show running config, let's try that again. Show running config. Wait a minute. I'm user privileged exec. Why can't I do it? I'm at the wrong prompt. I actually have to type exit, be at this level. Now I can do show running config. I'm going to show you a little shortcut behind that in a moment. But what I want to show you, not the entire running config, but look, the change I made, it shows up in the running config. So any changes you make occur in the running config and take effect immediately. There's just a couple of commands, not many, that you actually have to reboot a device, but that's very uncommon, or do something else. Most commands take effect immediately in RAM memory, in the running config. That's any configurations we make, this is where it's done. All right, let me go back into global configuration mode. I can also do config T, that takes me there. There's a very important command. I even hate having to, let's see if I can make this happen. I'm going to do exit here. What happens if I type in IP? I'm trying to make a command here that I can. Okay. I made a typo here. What? And what's it doing? Well, it thinks I'm trying to connect to a device. It's trying to resolve this name. It says, oh, Rick, you must be giving me a name of a device you want me to communicate with. I think I froze there. Okay, I'm back. So we have to sit here and wait. I hit enter. There's no way out of this. No break key, nothing. You just have to sit and wait. You know, it takes like a minute. It's such a pain. I'm going to show you how to keep this from happening. Okay. So this is I'm going to show you some of the first commands I do when configuring any device. Oh, come on. I'm hitting enter. It's kind of like waiting for the elevator. Keep on hitting the button. It's got to make it come faster, right? I'm hitting the enter. There we go. Finally. All right. I'll show you how to keep that from happening. Conf T, go to global configuration mode. You want to do this. No IP domain lookup. That will keep that from happening. Let me show you. Let me type telbed again. Now watch what happens. Whoops, let me give myself a prompt. If you don't see the prompt, just hit enter. Doesn't matter. I'm going to type telbed again. And it just tells me unknown. Isn't that better? Okay, so that's a very important command. Keep your sanity. All right. Let's go back in global configuration mode. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to configure, going to bring this back. Here we go. I'm going to configure this console port. Okay, that's what we are connected to by default. Okay, but there's a few things I want to do. Okay, so that console port, by the way, if I do question mark, you'll see the command line, configure a terminal line. So I'm going to do line question mark. You're going to see we have console. I'm going to configure the console line. That's the console port. And there's only one console port. There's only one, and that's 0. Okay, we only have the one console port. Okay, notice my prompt changes. It tells me I'm in one of the lines. What line am I in? Well, I have to remember I'm in the console line. Okay, I'm going to type in the following commands, and I'll explain these in a moment. Logging synchronous. I can type. I'm going to do, there we go, autocomplete. Logging synchronous, what that does is, as we will see, sometimes we're in the middle of typing a command and the operating system sends us some output and it interrupts our command. Oh, I froze here. Okay. It interrupts our command. We'll see probably an example of this, I'm sure, as I'm going through this. But we want to make sure that it doesn't, that it get, what this command does is it gives us a new prompt and leaves us off where we were typing. It just makes it easier. I'll show that a little later. This next command I'm going to show you is a command you should only use in a lab. Exec timeout 00. That means don't time out. Those are hours and seconds, I believe. I'd have to look, but don't time out. So in the real world, a production network, if you are configuring a device and then you get up and take a phone call, you got somebody wants to talk to you, you don't want to leave this device logged in. Just like you do an online banking or something, it will time you out in case somebody walks by. You don't want to give them access. This keeps you from timing out. Just makes when you're doing labs a little easier. Okay, the next command I'm going to give is password Cisco and login. Show you what this does here. What this does is if somebody plugs in to the device, plugs into your device, you don't want them to just have access to the device. You want them to actually require a password before they get a prompt. Okay. So let's take a look at what happens here. I'm going to do exit. Watch what happens when I do exit. Exit. That will pop me back 1. Now I'm back at global config. Let me do exit again. Now I'm at the regular prompt. Exit, exit. Yeah. Now I'm going to do exit again. If I do exit again, remember, disable takes me back to user exec. Exit actually takes me all the way out. Okay. So now I'm out. Now if I hit enter, watch what happens. Password. Cisco. Oops. My keyboard. there we go. And I'm in now, my password, I'm in user exec mode. Okay. Let's do enable. And I'm just going to do AENA for enable. Now let's take a look at the show running config. I'll do show running config. Okay, let's see. Here's our commands. There's our host name. There's that no IP domain lookup. Let's see what else we got going on here. Oh, here's my line console passwords, my line console commands. Login synchronous, password, login, exec timeout. It's all there in the running config in RAM memory. Okay. Now, let's do this. All of this is in RAM memory. Let me ask you, what would happen if we rebooted the router right now, turned it off, turned it back on, what would happen to all that information in the running config? You can just type it in if you want, or what would happen to everything in the running config? Let's say I just spent 5 hours configuring this device. Storm is coming. I better get home because it looks like I don't, we may lose power. I better get home. So I get home, come back to work next day, and it disappears because it's in RAM memory. Everything would be lost. So what we need to do is copy this information to NVRAM in the startup config. So when the router reboots, it has that information. Let's take a look. So first of all, let's see, is there a startup config file? There is not, because we haven't done anything. We haven't copied it. It's still running config. So let me copy the running config to the startup config. There we go. Now I'll hit enter. It asks you startup config. Yes. Okay. Done. Now, if I do show startup config, it's identical to my my startup config is now identical to my running config. If I reload this router, okay, it's booting right now. I did reload. So this is what a boot up looks like. I did a reload. So here it's booting up, the bootloader, giving me information about the device, how much flash memory and other kinds of memory it has. Here it is booting the operating system from flash. It's copying it from flash into RAM and booting up. Here's some more power on self-test stuff. Okay, it gives me all the information. Here's the operating system. Tells me press return to get started, and that's a good sign. There we go. Now I'm in. Okay. But you know what? I just went from privileged exec mode, user exec mode to privileged exec mode without, wait a minute, we probably should password that because we want some people on our team to have access to monitor and view the device information, but we don't want everybody to have access to configuring the device information. So let's create a password to go from user exec to privileged exec. So I got to go into global configuration mode, and the password, the way we do that is enable secret, and then the password. I'm just going to use class. Okay. Now, if I do exit, I'm going to do disable. I am in user exec mode. I'm going to go into privileged exec mode. And now it's asking for that enable secret password, CLASS. By the way, you do not see the passwords when you type them in. Okay. Let's do show running config. And you will see there's our enable secret password, and it's encrypted in the running and startup config. This is not very good encryption. It's just meant for somebody looking over your shoulder doesn't see it. All right, any questions so far? How are we doing? Is this helping? Everybody doing okay? And these are real Cisco iOS commands. All right. Okay, cool. All right. Now I'm going to do something on this switch. I am going to configure an IP address. Now, before I do this, let me make this really clear. A switch does not need an IP address to do its forwarding of Ethernet frames, okay? I am going to configure an IP address on this switch so we can remotely access it from the network. I'll explain in a moment. Okay, so when you buy an Ethernet switch, like for your house or even for school, it does not need an IP address. Okay, you can just plug it in to the network, connect your devices, and it works. Okay, this is only so we can remotely manage it, and I'll show you that in a moment. Okay, so if you remember in our running config, we had something called interface VLAN 1. Now, VLANs are something we'll talk about, or you'll learn about in the CCNA 2 class. But this is where we would configure on a Cisco switch, at least until we get into learning more about VLANs. This is how we would configure an IP address. So what I'm going to do is global configuration mode. So we start there first. If I do question mark, I'll see that there's an interface right there. So I'm going to do interface. And by the way, if I do question mark here, I see a lot of my interfaces, the different ports on the switch. The switch is made up of a lot of different ports. Let's see if I go physical mode here. We can, no. That's not what I want to do. Let me do this. That's what I want. So normally when we talk physical interfaces, it's these ports here, fast Ethernet or gigabit Ethernet ports, okay? Here's our console port, by the way, right here. Okay. What I'm talking about here, I'm going to be configuring, is actually a virtual port. This will allow access to the switch from any device connected to it. Okay, I'll show that in a moment. So let's get started. I'm going to do interface VLAN 1. Then I give it an IP address. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give an IP address, and we'll learn more about IP addresses later. But I'm going to give an IP address just like a host on the network. And something called a subnet mask. We'll learn more about that later as well. Okay. So I'm configuring it similar to almost any device. I'm going to do no shutdown, and I'm going to do exit. So I just configured interface VLAN 1. I gave it an IP address. Now there's something else I need to do. I need to go in. I'll show these in the running config when we're done. There's one other thing I need to do to be able to remotely log into it. And that is to configure what is called the VTY lines. Remember we did VTY console? Now I'm going to do VTY, stands for virtual terminal. It allows us to remotely log into a device. Now, typically we have from 0 to 15. Well, you don't need that many people logging in at the same time, but we'll do 0 to 15. This is just say this applies to upwards of 16 total people being able to remotely log in at the same time. That would never happen. All right, I'm going to say password Cisco. We'll see how this is used in a moment. Login. Then I'm going to say transport input. I'm going to do a question mark here. And you'll notice that there's two ways to log in, SSH or Telnet. In a production environment, we'll talk more about this later, but you want to always use SSH. It sends everything encrypted, including the password. Telnet should only be used in a lab environment because it sends everything clear text. Oh, I think I froze here. Okay. Telnet should only be used in the lab environment because it sends everything over clear text, including the password. So I know it's almost 9:50. I'm going to go to 10:15, okay? Hopefully that works for everybody. Now we're going to use Telnet because there's nothing else needed to set up. SSH requires some more configuration. So I'm going to use Telnet. Okay, assuming we're in a lab environment. Okay, let me do exit. Let me do exit again. Let's do the show running config. See what we've done here. There's my interface VLAN 1. So cool. Everything we do is identical in the running config. Here's my line VTY. It breaks it up from 0 to 4 and 5 to 15, but it's the same thing. These are the commands that we just gave. Okay, we just did 0 to 15. It separates it like this. I won't go into the history behind this, but all right. So what did we just do? We gave it an IP address. We allow Telnet with this password. What does that mean, Rick? Let's take a look. Oh, by the way, you notice the password is clear text. What if I want that encrypted? Let me do that real quick. There's a command I can use called service password encryption. Watch what happens in global configuration mode when I give this command. You notice our Telnet password was not encrypted, so somebody looking over our shoulder would see it. Now watch. I do show running config, and look, it's encrypted. Not very good encryption, but keeps somebody from just getting the password looking over our shoulder. Okay, now I'm going to show you how this works. Then I'll come back to the banner and stuff. Let's see what we just did. Okay, I'm going to add a computer. Let's do a PC here. I'm going to connect this computer, copper straight through cable, fast Ethernet to any port on the switch. Doesn't matter. Okay. Now you see this orange light here? That's going to turn green in about 50 seconds. It's running something called spanning tree. We'll talk a little bit. I'll mention that a little later in another class. Not another class, later in this course. Okay. All right, but I need to configure this PC. I'm going to give it an IP address. I go to config tab, fast Ethernet. I'm going to statically give it an address, 192.168.1.100. Click subnet. There we go. So it's on the same network. We'll learn more about this later, but both the switch's IP address and our IP address is 192.168.1 is the network port. Begins with that. So if you remember, we gave our switch the IP address 192.168.1.5. Okay. Now what I'm going to do, and I've got to show you how to do this in a moment, we're going to telnet into the switch. Okay, so the way I do that is I'm going to go to desktop, command prompt. I'm going to say telnet, remotely log in. So I'm sitting in my office and I want to remotely log into the switch. I don't want to have to go over to the data center, the wiring closet. It might be another building. It might be in another city. But as long as I have network access to the device, I can just say telnet. I wouldn't want to use telnet in production network, but in our little scenario here, telnet 192.168.1.5, the IP address of the switch. Hit enter, and it's asking for the password. So that's our VTY password that we gave it, right? Get up here someplace. Yeah, so this password right here, Cisco. So let's give it Cisco. Look at that. It says if I'm there connected via the console port. Okay, can I go into enable mode? Certainly. Oh, what was that? Class, wasn't it? CLASS. Ah, I hate this keyboard. There we go. Look, I can do show run. I can configure the switch from here if I want. Really? Yeah, maybe we can, let's configure something. Because I don't want to walk over to the wiring closet to do it. I think I have a banner message of the day. Yeah, we haven't done this yet. I'm going to go into global configuration mode. And when somebody tries to telnet or console into our device, we want some kind of banner. Okay. Banner message of the day. And then the next command I give is a delimiter. I'm going to do a $sign. Okay. That means I can't use the $sign in my message. That's going to show the end of the message. I can hit enter. Look at this. I can do all kinds of cool things here. I can use the £sign to make a nice border, hit enter, enter a couple of times, authorized access, access only. I'll do some more, as always you can make it as okay. My banner continues until I hit the $sign. Okay, that was my delimiter right here, right? So I'm gonna hit the $sign. And there it is. It ends the message, the banner. Now, what did that banner just do? Let's take a look. I'm going to exit out of here. I'm going to exit again. So that just popped me back one. What if I exit? I can also do quit. I am out. I'm back at my DOS prompt. I'm going to telnet back in. Cisco. Okay. Now I'm going to do enable. Oh, so here we go. Look at this. Authorized access only. There was my banner. Okay. Kind of cool. Okay, I'm going to do exit again here. Let me click out of that. I just also want to show you the same thing is for the console port. If I was connected to the console port, exit, hit enter, I get the banner. So either going in through telnet, SSH, or the console port, I see the banner. Oh. Okay, I'm logged in the switch. We're almost actually doing pretty good here. Let's see some things. Let's copy. Everything looks good. So I want to make sure that, if this reboots, of course, I want to make sure all of this is safe. So let's copy the running config. And by the way, I can just say copy, run to start. Okay. The other thing with that IP address, by the way, we'll learn more about this command later. Not only can I telnet into it, I can ping the switch. We'll learn more about ping. But a switch, let me say this once again, does not have to have an IP address for it to do what it's supposed to do, and that is forward Ethernet frames. And we'll learn more about that later. The IP address is just so we can remotely manage the device. Okay. Any questions?